Willkommen in einem anderen Aufregendes Video, or welcome to another exciting video. In this case we're covering part 6 of my battle series. The battle covered here is the Battle of Raseiniai, which was a World War II battle fought during the invasion of Russia. This took place between the 22nd and 26th of June 1941. It was the first time opposing tank formations engaged each other when the Germans invaded Russia, or at least the first time significant tank formations engaged with each other. This shows the overall Army Group North offensive into Russia, showing the Battle of Raseiniai, or at least where it occurred. Finding source material to describe this battle was not easy. This map shows the two Russian mechanized corps, the German 41st Panzer Corps and the 56th Panzer Corps, all of which were involved in some way in the battle. If we drill down into the German corps, this shows the location of the 41st Panzer Corps and the direction of its attack. The 41st Panzer Corps had reached its initial objectives by the 22nd, with the 56th Panzer Corps probably at the end of the arrow shown here. The Russians were forced to divert the 28th Tank Division to meet the German 56th Panzer Corps, less one of its tank regiments. You can see the 3rd and 12th Mechanised Corps on either side of the 41st German Panzer Corps lines of advance. Unfortunately in this map it's a little bit hard to make out, but this does show the divisional deployment and movement of the German forces during the invasion of Russia. I must admit wondering how accurate this is, as several sources do not agree with some of the positions, but the initial positions of each division is probably correct. A big caveat to this video: I found getting good source material very difficult. What I did find often contradicted other source material that I had. For example, the 6th Panzer Division was supposed to have been attacked on the 23rd and forced back by the 2nd Tank Division at a town called Schlachten. This town was well to the north of Raseiniai and nowhere near the 2nd Tank Division's assembly point. I suspect the location was actually bitchute, as shown in this map. I've gone with this map, although it also has significant issues. This is what I think the main battlefield looked like, and I've had to make a lot of guesses around here, and possibly some of them were wrong. The battlefield, which spanned over 90 kilometres from left to right, also spanned further north than what you see here, which is where the 12th Corps assembled. Now the woods locations that I have here are from Google Maps and represent the woods situation as it exists today. It's possible there were more woods in this area in 1941, but the location of the train did explain a few things which did puzzle me in the accounts. This area was heavily forested and movement was pretty much restricted to roads or trails, although there were some open cultivated areas which were traversed by the 1st Panzer Division on the 23rd of June, but these weren't that common. This shows the Russian deployment on the 21st of June. I've also added the location of the two German Panzer Corps. The poor old 48th Rifle Division was not going to have a very good time here. The 3rd Mechanised Corps was spread over a wide front, as you can see in this yellow circle. The 3rd Mechanised Corps, commanded by General Kurkin, was parked near Vilnius and added to the 11th Army, which included 15 kV heavy tanks and 50 T-34 tanks. It was composed of the 2nd Armoured Division with 15 kV tanks, 50 T-34s and 120 T-26 and BT tanks, and 30 other light tanks. The 5th Armoured Division with 250 T-26 tanks, the 84th Mechanised Division with 200 T-26 tank, the 15th Motorcycle Regiment. I'm guessing not all these formations were involved, as I will discuss later in the video. I also have a more accurate breakdown of the various divisions, which you can also see later in the videos, or at least the divisions that I know were involved in the battle. The 12th Corps was also spread over a wide front. The 28th Tank Division, while part of the 12th Mech, did get allocated elsewhere based on one source I found. I also understand from a separate source that one of the regiments from the 26th Tank Division was allocated to the 23rd Division, so it wasn't the entire division. Finding source material and getting all these details right was a real nightmare. Another interesting point about the 12th Mechanised Corps is apparently it was originally deployed way up north, somewhere near Leningrad or the border between the Baltic states and Russia, and was only moved down here recently with its fuel depots still way up north. And it had, as a result, severe issues with fuel. Now, that could have been one of the reasons why the 23rd Tank Division did not move down south as quickly as I would have normally expected, but I'm sure it's not the entire reason. Okay, the 12th Mechanised Corps was commanded by Topovolo, my apologies for the Russian pronunciation or the lack of, and it was equipped with 700 what they call outdated tanks, deployed to the rear of the 8th Army in the coastal region of Lithuania, and this consisted of the 21st Armoured Division with 230 T-26 and BT tanks, 28th Armoured Division with 230 BT and a handful of T-28 tanks, 202nd Mechanised Division with 200 T-26 tanks, and the 10th Motorcycle Regiment. I'm pretty certain the 28th Tank Division was diverted to stop the 56th Panzer Corps. It's also very possible that 202nd Mechanised Division and the 9th Anti-Tank Brigade was also diverted to attempt to stop this German corps, which only left the 23rd Tank Division free, as well as one additional regiment from the 28th Tank Regiment, and that was the only force that was actually involved in the attack. But I could be wrong, and the 202nd Mech Division could have actually been involved. Now, the main armoured engagement, and actually probably one of the first armoured engagement in the invasion, occurred around the town of Raseiniai, which is shown in the yellow circle. The assembly areas for the Russian attacks are also shown here. The fate of the 12th Corps attack is probably the greatest mystery of this battle. If we swing over to the German side, the German thrust on the first day saw two Panzer divisions moving towards Raseiniai. The direction of the 56th Panzer Corps is a little bit of a mystery. I've assumed a straight line to its objective, which may be incorrect. I assume it was try and form a pocket, which would have consisted of the 121st Rifle Division, or perhaps the thrust may have been more northerly and more of a curve, so it could have included the 90th Rifle Division as well. The Russians threw the 28th Tank Division and perhaps also the 202nd Mechanised Division to deal with this threat. This shows the Russian plan. The Russian attempted to cut off the German armoured thrust of the 41st Panzer Corps with their two corps, as you can see here. The plan was sound, but the German panzers moved too quickly, the Russian Mechanised Corps moved too slowly, and the German Air Force inflicted significant losses even before some of the engagement had occurred. On the other hand, the Russian attack consisted of a very large number of tanks, and some of these tanks were very heavy, and the Germans basically had no answer to. If the commander were capable and launched this attack with any kind of speed, the result would have been very different. Now, in many sources, they keep on talking about the Russians having obsolete tanks. Well, yeah, sure, some of the very light tanks were particularly not useful, but then neither were the Panzer Is of the German army. So I think a lot of that is grossly exaggerated. Let's drill down into the Russian OB, or Order of Battle. The battle occurred in the Russian Northwest Front. This shows the front assets, including air assets. The Air Force suffered massive losses in the first few days of the German invasion and were rarely seen in the air during the battle, at least according to the sources I've read. I'm also assuming most of the German medium bomber forces, and probably fighters, were involved in destroying the Russian Air Force and interdicting Russian movement, leaving the Germans only with their highly effective Stukas, but the Stukas did not number that much. The 12th Mechanised Corps was part of the 8th Army. The German panzer attack had to go through the 11th Infantry Corps, and a lot of the initial resistance at Raseiniai may have consisted of elements of this particular corps. Anyway, that's my guess, and possibly it was conducted by parts of the 48th Infantry Division. The defence was not particularly effective, so it probably meshes that the defenders were hastily placed there. The 3rd Mechanised Corps was part of the 11th Army. The 2nd Tank Division represented the most powerful force involved in the attack, containing KV-1s, KV-2s and T-34 tanks. The 5th Tank Division also, I think, had some good tanks, but most of them were fairly obsolete. But I'm unsure if this division was even involved in the attack. Now, as you'll see in the maps, the main formation that you'll really see that was actually involved in fighting with the Germans is only the 2nd Tank Division of the 3rd Mechanised Corps. The 22nd Army was deployed in the rear of the front, and for this video is not involved in the battles which raged between the 22nd and the 27th of June. This chart from a particularly good source shows the manpower and equipment within each Russian tank division. The tank divisions in the 12th Mechanised Corps did not contain any heavy tanks or 234 tanks, but we still see a lot of manpower and equipment being deployed here. Luckily for the Germans, the Russian purges ordered by Stalin devastated its command and control, which dramatically reduced its effectiveness. The key number here that you can see is there are almost 400 tanks, which is an awful lot of tanks. But in terms of manpower, considering the number of tanks, not as impressive. These formations were very tank heavy, and it's unlikely the Mechanised Divisions allocated any of their motorised infantry regiments to these divisions to give them more infantry support. And this could be one key reason why, even though the Russians had a lot of tanks, they were unable to overcome the final German defensive line. Again, from this rather good source, this shows the structure of the armoured regiments. I mean, it's a generic structure. Now, the 2nd Tank Division probably possessed a heavy tank battalion and medium tank battalion. The other divisions did not, and consisted of older and lighter tanks. This is, as I indicated before, a very good source, as prior to me discovering this, I lacked anywhere near this level of detail. This shows the structure of the motorised infantry regiment, which did have a very useful anti-tank capability. Unlike the Germans, the Russian tank divisions were very tank heavy, or basically it consisted of 2 tank regiments and 1 motorised infantry, while the Germans were the opposite. Finally, we get to the support formations, which had 3 batteries of very useful 37mm anti-aircraft guns. It's interesting about the air support the Germans provided. There's certainly many accounts of German aircraft causing major issues for the 12th Mech Corps, but the 2nd Tank Division, Russian, there's very few, if any, sources I could find which show German air attacks. While I'm uncertain if the mechanised divisions were even involved in this attack, it's likely that the elements of them may have been. This shows the equipment and manpower of the mechanised division, which only possessed lighter tanks. Regardless, this had very useful infantry. However, there seemed to be a lack of coordination, and the tanks often went into action with no infantry support. This was not uncommon, and actually most armies in this period experienced this same issue, with the exception of the Germans, which is probably why the Germans were so successful. The meaty part of the mechanised division were, of course, their 2 motorised rifle regiments and 1 light tank regiment. While the tanks were light, they were still good, if not better, than most of the tanks the Germans were deploying. The motorised artillery regiment, which was in actually both divisions, was in theory superior to the German regiments, the 122s particularly being very effective howitzers. However, in practice, there did not seem to be much artillery mentioned in my few sources, so I'm not quite sure what these formations were actually doing during the battle. And finally, for completeness, the supporting formations are listed here. As I indicated before, the artillery was numerous and very good, and the anti-tank capability was extremely good as well. Before I found my recent source, I used a number of incomplete sources, including Zaloga and also Nasfinger, and attempted to fill in the gaps, and came up with this. I'm pretty certain this is not the correct structure, based on the fact there's only 3 tank battalions in each regiment. And I'm pretty certain that there were 4, and that 1 division had a heavy tank battalion, as well as the other types of light and medium battalions. But anyway, I've just displayed this here as an example because I think the structure shown here makes it a little bit clearer. The mechanised infantry, artillery and supporting formations are correct. For completeness, I will also show you my earlier estimate of the Mechanised Division. If you ignore the tank regiment, which I'm pretty certain is incorrect, the rest is pretty accurate. So let's look at the Russian force. In theory, the Russians had 2 full mechanised corps involved in the battle, with the exception of most of 1 tank division. This was a significant armoured force, which should have caused the Germans a lot more problems than it actually did. In practice, I highly suspect only 2 tanks were involved, the 2nd and the 23rd Tank Division. Considering the results, it's pretty much the only way I could, explain why the Russians did so poorly in this counterattack. This shows a standard German Panzer Division in June 1941 with 1 Panzer Regiment and 2 motorised infantry regiments. The Germans often broke up the divisions into 2 Kampfgruppen, one with a Panzer and motorised infantry regiment, which was their main striking force, and the other with the remaining motorised infantry regiment and other supporting battalions such as anti-tank and reconnaissance, and this was kind of, I suppose, the shield. At 66 tanks per battalion, and with only 2 battalions, the Germans only had about 132 tanks versus the almost 400 of each of the Russian tank divisions. The 41st Panzer Corps contained 1 motorised infantry division, and I'm pretty certain it had to have been involved in the battle, even if the sources are reasonably silent on the matter. I suspect this division was used to stop the Russian 23rd Tank Division. It was very mobile, but it was mainly a defensive style of formation. This shows the German Panzer Corps, which consisted of 2 Panzer divisions and 1 motorised infantry division. At least 1 infantry corps were advancing behind. It should be noted that the other German Panzer Corps was also coming in from another flank. Now, it didn't arrive on the battlefield that you'll see in a moment before the Russians withdrew, but nonetheless, if the Russians stuck around, we would have probably at least had another couple of German Panzer divisions involved. Now we move into guesswork. This shows the possible position of the opposing forces in the morning of the 22nd of June. The Russian forces up north were actually off the map on this day, but they were approaching the location shown in this map. The 23rd Tank Division had suffered serious losses from German air attacks on the 22nd of June, probably Stukas. The 202nd Mechanised Division was supposed to be with the Russian 12th Mechanised Corps, but there's virtually no mention of this formation during the battle. One source indicates the 28th Tank Division had been split off and sent north the day before, which is very likely. Now, I did find that one of the tank regiments had been reallocated to the 23rd Tank Division, so it was only part of the 28th Tank Division which had been split off. On the right, we have the 3rd Mechanised Corps, which mainly consisted of the 2nd Tank Division. The 5th Tank Division was almost never mentioned except at the end of the battle, but must have been with the Corps as well as the 84th Mechanised Division being with the Corps. I suspect both formations were in the rear and only elements of these divisions were caught up in the pocket. Basically, the German 1st Panzer Division cut these formations off from the 2nd Tank Division. The Germans did have the 3rd Motorised Division off this map, but it must have also been involved. My guess it was used to stop the 23rd Tank Division. On the 22nd of June at 9 a.m, the Russians were ordered to start their counterattack, the 3rd Mechanised Corps having assembled close to Raseiniai and the 12th Mechanised Corps at s5e24. The Russian 12th Mechanised Corps was attacked by the German Air Force and suffered heavy losses during the advance. This may have caused its advance to be delayed, allowing the 1st Panzer Division to cross its intended path of advance and drive down in the rear of the Russian 2nd Tank Division. This shows the German advance during the 22nd, 23rd. Now, I'm not sure where the Germans got up to by the end of the 22nd. Possibly they got to the main town, Raseiniai, or possibly just in front of it. There was some fighting in front of Raseiniai, which I have to assume was defended possibly by infantry. It's possible some advanced elements of the 2nd Tank Division or even the 84th Mechanised Division was involved in the defence. The frontline Russian rifle divisions would have been pinned down by German infantry, although possibly some rear elements of that was also involved. Whatever these forces were, the Germans quickly brushed these forces away and drove north and east. The Germans were split into two Kampfgruppen, the weaker group driving east, and the Panzer regiments, with a motorised infantry regiment, drove north. It's possible it was this advance which was halted by the lone Russian KV tank, which, if correct, indicates there must have been elements of the 2nd Tank Division well forward of the main body of this division. The main part of the 2nd Tank Division attacked the weaker all-infantry Kampfgruppen of the 6th Panzer Division, causing the Germans to retreat back to the town where they must have formed some form of more substantial defensive line. The sources indicate the light tanks went forward first and suffered heavy losses, but the heavy tanks in the rear overran the German anti-tank guns. Some sources indicate that the German anti-tank guns were 5cm Pak 38s, but I suspect most were the 3.7 Pak 36s. I want to really emphasise an awful lot of guesswork is being done in this particular point, and this map is certainly no exception to that guesswork. Anyway, I suspect it's roughly correct. The German 1st Panzer Division swung back to attack the Russian 2nd Tank Division in the rear once they discovered the attack by the Russian Tank Division. In addition, the Panzer regiments of the 6th Panzer Division must have reversed course and went down to assist in defence. I suspect they were actually held up by that lone KV tank, and it was a good thing that they were held up because they were fairly close to the other Kampfgruppen. I often wondered about the defence, that is, the defence against the 2nd Tank Division. The Germans had an anti-tank battalion in that Kampfgruppen, which consisted of 36 Pak 36 or Pak 38 guns. I suspect one company was Pak 38 and two 36s. If one Russian regiment was attacking at about 150 plus tanks, this could have suffered extremely heavy losses before destroying this large number of anti-tank guns. However, and again this is real guesswork, but I really suspect the German anti-tank guns which were overrun only consisted of one company of 12 guns, and this occurred when the Germans first met the Russians on the right, where you can see the 2nd Tank Division symbol. The Germans then withdrew to the better defensive position near Raseiniai, and with their two remaining anti-tank companies, probably their anti-aircraft 8.8cm guns, and also the other Kampfgruppen managed to stop the Russians. This is the source map which I am using in the assumption that I just mentioned. By the time the Russians reached the town, that's Raseiniai, the German Panzer Regiment had rejoined the rest of the division. You can see where the road was blocked by the KV tank, which may have been, as I indicated before, a really good thing. If it did not block the road, the more powerful Kampfgruppen would have been further north and may not have been able to rejoin their retreating comrades back at Raseiniai. There is a lot of guesswork here, and even this map is not a primary source and actually conflicts with yet other sources, which is one reason why normally in my battle series I sort of break it down into hour by hour and day by day and try and provide fairly detailed positions of the formations down to regiment or even battalion level. There's no way I can do that this battle. I can only give you a very brushstroke overview type view of the battle. What occurred on the 25th of June also represents real guesswork. The Russian 12th Corps, which had been badly damaged by German air attacks, or at least the 23rd Tank Division, which probably dramatically affected its capacity and delayed its advance, which could be one reason why its advance was delayed. If it had managed to hit the German Panzer divisions in the rear, the Germans would have been in real trouble. So I have to ask myself, what was stopping them? German infantry was unlikely to have kept up with the Panzers, although it's possible some forward elements would have entered the map at the bottom here, but only the 3rd Motorised Division could have stopped the Russian advance of the 23rd Tank Division. This division only consisted of BT tanks and other light tanks, so the 3rd Motorised Division could have held it back. Other reasons are that it ran out of fuel, the Germans were constantly attacking it over several days and delaying its advance. All these things would also have been a factor, but you still needed troops or infantry in the field actually stopping forward elements of this division, causing the Germans difficulty, and the only formation available was the trusty old 3rd Motorised Division. On the right of this image, the 2nd Tank Division was almost surrounded by the two German Panzer divisions. German infantry would have been advancing from the south by now along the bottom, so the Russians couldn't escape in that direction. I'm uncertain if the 84th Mechanised Division or 5th Tank Division were in the positions that I show here. I suspect only forward elements of these divisions were present, and the 1st Panzer Division blocked their line of advance. On the 25th, the Russian 8th Army began to withdraw, although none of these formations yet were ordered to withdraw. By the end of the 26th of June, the Germans had completed the encirclement of the 2nd Tank Division at least, and also possibly elements of the 84th Mech and the 5th Tank. The 2nd Tank Division was almost completely destroyed, with the 5th Tank and 84th Mechanised Division only suffering heavy losses. So some formations managed to escape if they were in the pocket, or, as I strongly suspect, never really arrived to be surrounded. The 12th Mech Corps up north was ordered to withdraw, and it managed to escape being encircled, although I suspect it would have taken a few days for the Germans to swing their panzer divisions around to attempt this anyway. In conclusion, by any sort of military logic, the Germans should not have won. The Russians heavily outnumbered the Germans, had a good plan, and began the attack on the 22nd of June, so were in time to do some real damage. Instead, it ended in disaster, with one Mech Corps almost completely destroyed and the other so badly damaged it was only a shadow of its former strength. What happened and how did it happen? Personally, I feel the issue was the destruction of the officer corps ordered by Stalin in the previous years. The fact the tank divisions had only been formed recently, possibly only 12 months ago, also probably caused issues. But good command should have resolved this. The quality of equipment may have, been a minor issue, but even if the Russians lost half their tanks to breakdown, they would still have had enough armoured forces to cause the Germans real problems. All this is obviously my opinion. I have to admit, attempting to create a scenario for this battle has been a nightmare. While creating a scenario, I really had to assume only 2 Russian tank divisions were involved, maybe some minimal elements of a rifle division as well, and that the German 3rd Motorised Division actually was involved in the battle and held back one of these tank divisions. It's almost impossible to duplicate this battle if the Germans lacked this motorised division and if the Russians had more of their core level divisions involved. It's possible, and I wish some player all the best of luck in the endeavour of creating a more accurate scenario. However, I have created a scenario of sort which gives the Russians a better chance of winning. It's probably not 100% historical, but it gives you an interesting game, which is really the objective I have in the analysis of these historical games. The force mixes involved are a little bit large, but I'm using a set of board game rules converted into figure gaming format, which does this reasonably easily. One other good source I have is Sharp's books on the Russian army. This shows the 3rd Tank Division, formed in July 1940, so it was only in existence for 12 months before it was actually involved in this combat. So for those people interested in knowing the exact numbers of the regiments and motorised rifle regiments involved in the battle, here they are. This shows the same thing with the 23rd Tank Division. One reason why my earlier TO&E basically assumed 3 battalions per regiment was that these divisions were formed from existing tank brigades, and that's the way the tank brigades were organised. Clearly, when the Russians formed their tank divisions, they did a lot of additional tweaking. For those people interested, the rules that I'm using to reproduce this battle is called Neue Schwerpunkt, and it uses a scale of 1 to 60,000 and a game turn scale of 24 hours, which is a bit long for a 6-day battle, but as the Russians are not as normally defeated as quickly, it normally goes to 8 game turns and gives me a good solid game. But even if you want to duplicate the exact battle as it occurred, which is 6 days, that's 6 game turns, gives you a good game. This shows the playing area I'm using with based on one of the source maps that I identified. Each square here represents 30 centimetre square, or 1 square foot area. This allows me to include the deployment, or the full deployment, of the 12th Mechanised Corps way up north. This shows my playing area template, showing you forests, rivers. There's an awful lot of streams here, and I suspect when I create this playing area, I will probably exclude quite a few of the unnecessary streams. But it also shows you the built-up areas and the roads. Now, the three types of roads here. The thick ones are what they call main roads. The thins are secondary, and the dotted ones are probably trails, which I probably will not depict on the playing area. This should give me a good playing area. Now, the main, or Raseiniai, you can see is kind of in the sort of the lower centre area, and you can see to its right the location where the 2nd Tank Division first met the Germans. The 12th Mech Corps is way up north, so probably in this scenario would arrive probably on game turn 1 along that main road running from the north edge down. If the game lasts for 12 days, you're going to get the 56th Corps coming in from the left. So, you could actually have quite an interesting game here, but as it ended up, or historically, I just don't think the Russians had the strength to really cause the Germans real issues, and they lacked the command control and ability to command what strength they did have to really make much of a difference. Well, this completes my video on this rather interesting battle. I initially thought it would give me a nice historical scenario, but once I actually drill down to it, it doesn't really, if I want to follow history. Finding a seesaw engagement on the Eastern Front in 1941 is proving to be rather difficult. I suppose I will have to rely on when the Germans got to the end of their supply lines around Smolensk or something. That may be an interesting scenario. Nonetheless, you could actually tweak this scenario a bit and assume the Russians have more forces and have slightly better command control and end up with a rather interesting game if you so desire. Denken Sie daran, immer für Ihre Heimatland zu kämpfen.